Ya, pada malam ini kita mahu mencari idea dan juga cara inovatif untuk mendapatkan antara lain pulangan terbaik, efisien dan juga efektif dalam menggunakan aset negara. Pada malam ini, kerana kita mempunyai tetamu di luar negara dan juga rancangan ini akan ditonton di luar negara, izinkan kami berbincang dalam bahasa Inggeris. Tonight we'll be talking about innovative ideas on effective usage of national assets and also ensuring high value returns on the utilization of national assets. Now, this is in conjunction with NAFAM 2009, which is the National Asset and Facility Management Convention, which will be held on the 26th and 27th of October at the Putra World Trade Center in Kuala Lumpur. Now, to find out more about NAFAM 2009, let me introduce my three special guests for tonight. Right next to me, on my right, is Yang Berbahagia, Datuk Seri Professor Insignio Dr. Judin bin Abdul Karim. He is the NAFAM 2009 Organising Chairman, who is also the Director General of Public Works Department, Malaysia. Welcome. The next to Datuk Seri is Professor Dr. Haji Kamalul Rashdan Haji Saleh. He is the Managing Director of Syarikat Perumahan Negara Berhad. Welcome, sir. And also all the way from the United Kingdom, Professor Michael Pitt, Professor of Facility Management and Head of Business Development, School of Built Environment, Liverpool John Moores University, United Kingdom. Welcome. Let me just start with Datuk Seri. When we talk about NAFAM 2009, maybe we can start with the key learnings that we can expect this time around. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Malaysia has undergone several phases of development.
Right.
We have, in fact, had 2 Rancangan Malaya and 9 Rancangan Malaysia.
Yeah.
And indeed, the result is a success story. Malaysia is highly regarded.
Yep.
It's also a model for many developing countries. Now we are about to approach. In 2011, we'll be starting Rancangan Malaysia 10, the 10th Nation Plan. Before, when we did the earlier development plans, in Malaysia is almost like a green field. So it's easy to do things, and there's not much constraint. But now, with so much development, there's now more constraint. So the idea of having this NAFAM 2009 is to introduce new concepts. In fact, RM10 will have several new concepts. One of the main key areas is that RM10 will be implemented in what is called rolling or seamless planning. Previously, our 5-year plans launched and it's on for 5 years. But now it will be launched with on a shorter basis, but on a continuous basis. So it's called the rolling plan. And then it will have more focus on clarity of outcomes, not just product, but outcomes. There will be more focus for outcomes, and there will be a concept of looking at strategic and integrated planning. And then we will also like to explore innovative procurement. That's why we are talking about how the other countries do such things. And we are going to introduce also a new concept of looking at things on a longer term basis, so what we call a life cycle costing basis. And of course there is also the need to look at monetization of our assets, as well as sustainability and green technology. So these are all that will be discussed in this NAFAM 2009.
Meaning we have to change. We really have to change. Now, how easy it is to change? For example, to monetize everything, we have to monetize everything. Even the set of our program has to be monetized, whether you have product placement and all that. Now, let's talk about Syarikat Perumahan Negara Berhad, for example. What new approaches do you feel that now that things have to be done differently? Now, how do you make sure that the thinking will go along with this?
Well, in general, if you see the practice that implemented in Malaysia for so many years. Basically, every asset that we develop, purely, particularly public assets, purely invested by the government, which in this case, that of course would affect the affordability of the governments to fund such assets if they want to develop it. And secondly, the problems with the balance sheet at the end. So in many developed countries like UK, for example, they are talking about how they can maximize their assets without affecting the off-balance sheet. And in order to do this, the only way they can see it is by liquidizing the asset, in the sense that either selling or transferring the asset to the third party to maximize it. and then they can use that assets, for the betterment of the public. If that is the case, then the issue would be how do we transform that assets into the so-called monetization.
Yes.
It reflects into two ways. The first one is either you can monetize it by outsourcing your asset to the third party, or secondly, you can equitization the assets. In other words, the government shared some shares in that particular asset with the private sector, and try to develop from there. So it's a different way of thinking. It's just the concern is that how flexibility it is in the market at the moment to accept this idea. And secondly, do we have a capacity and platform in place to deliver that kind of
this is where I think Professor Pitt would like to share on how. I mean, how is it done in the UK, for example?
Actually, I think the first thing I'd like to say, touching on something that Dr. Kamarul talked about, is that in the private sector, it is quite common to raise capital by process of sale and leaseback. And what we're really talking about here is trying to do that sort of thing, but in the public sector. So the process that we're talking about in the UK, we call it the Private Financial Initiative. It is a public-private partnership. And it originally came about in the early 1990s because many of our public buildings were becoming old and decrepit, and we needed to replace them, and there was this issue of capital expenditure. So what the Private Finance Initiative, the PFI system, allows us to do is to have new buildings in partnership with the private sector. And the way in which it operates, it is a controversial system. I think I should say that from the outset. Not everybody in the UK thinks this is wonderful. So it has its critics, but it has successfully delivered new hospitals, new schools, new prisons across the whole of the UK. And they do appear to work on an operational level very, very well. The system operates through a private sector consortium being asked to provide, if you like, the premises, but it's a bit more complicated than that. It differs from a commercial lease in the sense that it's not a space that's being rented, it's availability. So there's a hospital, let's take a hospital for example, that would decide exactly what is required. They will develop a specification and they will ask private sector consortia to bid to supply that building for a period of, say, 25 years. Inside the contract is a thing called a service level agreement, so that the hospital is able to say, as much detail as they like, we require 5 theatres to be available for certain times with certain equipment inside them. And that's really, on a fairly simple level, that's how it operates.
Okay, we have to go to a commercial break, but when we come back, how can we use that idea in this country? Maybe we can have a simple example so that we can understand better, can we? Yeah? Okay, we'll take a short break and we'll be back right after this. Yes, Professor Pitt, just now you mentioned a very interesting concept of public-private partnership. Now, before we went for the break, we said, can we do it now? And Doctor said, we have already started in some areas. Maybe we can have an example so that we can understand better this concept.
Well, in general, in Malaysia we have practiced, but we term it as a privatization. But in general, what do I see is that where those public infrastructures being managed and funded by the private sector. There are a lot of examples like expressway and as well as some of the public facilities like hospital and as well as the schools. But the concern among the public is that because when it involves the third party, what does it affect against the return at the end? Because of course, when involved like the private sector, they are concerned mainly on the commercial perspective, like how much profit they can make at the end. So if that is the case, then we have to look at into the angle where the ethos of social entrepreneurship should become the main focus to deliver public assets to the public. Because if you don't have that in mind, then of course, at the end, commercial would become the big issue, when you enter into that agreement. So that's why we're talking about PPP or PFI. The main thing is that first, what the value you will get at the end by practicing PPP-PFI. That's the first one. Secondly, what it creates against your asset. Does that mean that your asset become more equitized, liquidized, or is it just make your assets become more inefficient at the end due to the underutilized of some area where you should get maximization from that particular investment. And that's some of the issues that we're facing at the moment in Malaysia. But in general, to me, what the government needs to focus is that not just only looking in terms of the monetary gain, but I think we should focus on the core business of the assets. What we're looking at as like, for example, hospital. What do we want to gain from having PPP type, hospital? Because if we thinking about social obligation, we must ensure that when the treatment, for the treatment to the patients, when like for example, particularly patients from the poverty area where they can't afford to pay. So how do you fund them? How do you pay for their treatments that they have at the end? So that's why looking into this angle, I think in general, the government should maintain its core business as the operation of, as on the operational aspect of the hospital, but for the support service, that is where the private sector coming and help to achieve that objective.
Yeah, that's to say. Earlier on you mentioned two really interesting words: seamless and also rolling. Yeah. Okay. Now, agencies have been criticized, and also companies, subsidiaries, and all that. You're very silo in your planning. Okay, you want to do this, you want to achieve this, you want to do this, you want to achieve that. But at the end of the day, hey, we are doing the same thing. Now, how do you introduce this new thinking? Because some people will say, hey, maybe my territory is being invaded by somebody else, and how do you efficiently do this and implement it fast?
Well, we have seen that it's possible that an agency would have facilities and another agency would be having a similar facilities next to it. If we are able to integrate the planning, a lot of these facilities could be shared. In that way we can enhance value as well.
Right.
So the idea is that there is a need to have a concerted effort for integrated planning. If you look at each project as a musical note,
right?
And if you arrange them well, you get music. If you don't arrange them well, it's like noise.
How fast can we do that music instead of noise? Maybe we can get the UK experience, integrating different agencies which has been operating as silos, but at the end of the day, they know, hey, we can just, maybe you just do this and then we come up with this. But how long do you take to do that?
I think that the process itself is really dependent upon the people who are running it. It's really dependent on the skills of the government and the government agencies to come together in some sort of partnership. But what we're talking about there is, I think, something bigger than an individual project in itself. And that's going to be something for Malaysian politicians and senior civil servants.
For example, we do a lot building, and this building lasts a long time. They don't go away overnight. So if you build a poorly built building and it's there for a long time, it will affect the competitiveness of even of a city. If development funds are being used properly, you can even enhance competitiveness of cities or even states. So that, for example, we were talking among our friends, why would you visit a certain town? Whereas if you go to some of these more developed countries, each city has got a unique flavor that a tourist would want to make an extra effort to visit. But if you look at some of the towns that we have, they're quite plain. But each one should be unique, and each one should be attractive, and each one could be giving value. And that's the part of the idea, is that in a national development plan, maybe there needs to be a good master plan.
Now, we're going to another commercial break. When we come back, how do we bring that change that we really, really want? I think you mentioned the politicians, are they ready to do it? But I think we are ready to a certain extent, right? And how do we make it, I always believe in doing things fast, like, oh, we should have done it yesterday. But what are the requirements in order to affect that change? Yeah? We'll discuss that after this. Okay, we'll be right back. We'll go for a commercial break. Yeah, we are entering our final segment. We have about 7.5 minutes. Yeah, during the commercial, we were saying that, hey, we have to discuss something to make sure that people come to NAFAM 2009, so that paint a picture, what kind of change will we see in the very, very near future. Yeah. Okay, for example, what are the prerequisites? For example, earlier on, Professor Pitt mentioned that the politicians must be ready. And let's look at what we have at the moment that will make it easy for us to do that kind of transformation.
I think the government is ready for a change.
Yeah.
And that's why RM10 will be different. And that's partly the reason why private sector should come. And as well as government people will be there. This is an opportunity to talk about the Rancangan Malaysia ke-10, which will be finalized next year.
Yeah.
So we are introducing new concepts. Things like, as you said, a rolling plan. Things like value-add entry. And we do not want projects to go on the ground unless they have reached a certain level of maturity.
Yeah, for example, I think an example may be, okay, if you have a hill, instead of cutting down trees and all, and making sure that the hills are stable and all, because you need to build roads, that leave it as it is, but you build tunnels, that kind of thinking.
That's part of the core concepts in RM10, whereby we are looking at life cycle costing. So what is cheaper in the short term may not be cheaper in the long term. So technology would be appropriate technology will be used, such as tunneling and other features, so that we actually get in the long term value. So value is the focus outcome of maximizing the investment. That's important.
Yeah, but how do you tell that to an accountant, for example? You're planning long term, but for accounting purposes,
accountants are interesting people, aren't they? I think certainly the way we deal with this in the UK, looking at whether a particular project is value for money, it's a very important part of the process. We don't go into these things blindly. We use what we call a public sector comparator to try and demonstrate the value that is added by going through the private finance initiative process. And it's quite an exciting process, because what it does is, for the first time in the UK, we saw a focus on facilities management costs rather than simply construction costs. And that's really critical, because what a lot of people don't realise is that across a 25-year period of a building's life, the facilities management costs can be 10 times and more the original construction costs.
And what about the need to look at federal land now in a different perspective? Now you need different frame of reference in doing that.
Yeah, I think in general what we need to do is that probably we have land banks all over the states. The most important thing is that what vision the government has in terms of the the availability of the land banks, and how do they maximize that asset to achieve that vision that can later on benefit the public. I mean, the implementation of PPP PFR would be the best approach to me in order to monetize the land banks or monetize the asset, because that would echo what they call a public-private partnership, but has a social concern, in a sense that it creates such value to the public at the end, and when they try to develop that kind of approach, and of course it's a long-term perspective, as what Professor Pitt did mention, where at the end the cost would be 10 times higher due to the long-term contract, and we must understand either do we need that kind of approach? Is Malaysia really ready to enter into the long-term contract perspective, where at the moment we are more on the resource-based construction, for example, rather than program-based construction? So if we are doing that, so do we really prepared to enter into that kind of approach. But in general, I agree with Professor Judin. I think government in general are prepared to do this. They have a lot of discussion since early 2000 about PPPFI. I think it's just a matter of time.
Should I come in there just to take one
yes,
thing?
yes, please, go ahead.
One thing that I have seen in the UK, and I would offer as maybe a bit of a warning, is that from what I've seen from the operation of some of the UK private finance initiative projects, where the contracts are negotiated, it has often been the case where the better skilled, the more skilled negotiator works with the contractor. What you need is a skilled negotiator to work on both sides, so that you don't end up with a contract that favours the private sector. It's very important.
Now, what other things can we expect at NAFAM?
Well, it is an open platform, really. It's a discussion where you will see many top civil servants who are going to draft the RM10 be involved, the Director General for EPU, for example, and other people as well. And as well, we will have from private sector, and the two here are samples of people who will be our speakers. There will be many more from other countries as well. And I think we can learn not only from the UK experience, but we have also speakers from other countries. They will tell us what they have learned. So it's really a great opportunity for discussion, as well as to give feedback to the government. So when the Rancangan Malaysia is finalized, I think these views could be useful. So I think it's a great platform for sharing of information and experience locally, local experts as well as international experts.
We have 2 more minutes left. I just want to go back to this integrated management thing. How do you tell people that you shouldn't be afraid of this, and it will, at the end of the day, create more jobs and more opportunities for learning and all that, rather than, because people will always see it as, oh, okay, 4 agencies will become 1. Planning will be taken, because basically that's the first thing that would come to people's mind. How do you allay fears on that?
I think if you're talking about integrated planning, it's not we're going to combine everybody to become one. For example, let's say we have a prestigious project. If we could do that project in isolation, or we could do that project together with, say, Ministry of Tourism. So how do we build this project, which we're going to need anyway, and include in it tourism aspects, and how do we cater for tourists that are coming and all that? That's what we mean by integrated planning. And in that way, we do not just get one facility, but we get a facility that enhances its value.
Okay. Yes, we have 30 seconds left.
That's another perspective as well, in addition to what Professor Junaid raised earlier. I mean, like for example, school. So we have so many schools around in Malaysia, isn't it? So why don't we utilize this school to become as a community center as well?
Exactly.
Because there are some places where there is no balai raya, and then we can use the schools for many functions, isn't it? So it's just the willingness of some parties to share these facilities with others, and as well as building down the barriers from one to another and create more partnership. So I think that's the main thing that we need to look at.
And don't lock the computer centers after office hours. And let the old folks come and chat on the internet. Thank you so much, gentlemen. So if you need more information on NAFAM 2009, you can just Google. You have the information on the net. Thank you so much for watching. And if you need to give feedback, send your feedback to our email. Our email address is on your screen. Or you can also go to our Facebook. You go search for Astro Awani on Facebook. Thank you so much. We'll see you again tomorrow night. Thank you so much, gentlemen.